Woman dies, sees divine revelation of Prophet Muhammad's message in her near-death experience. Megan, she grew up in a strict Roman Catholic family, but her upbringing was not exactly typical. When she turned 20, she became an atheist. However, a significant change occurred in her life during a near-death experience in 2007. She doesn't like to label herself with any specific religion, but after that experience, she became a believer. At that time, she was deeply into fitness, regularly practicing yoga, and leading a healthy life. One night, she returned home with really bad stomach pain, which got worse over time. Despite getting treatment for what doctors first thought was colitis, the pain didn't go away. She can still remember a doctor in the hospital accusing her of seeking drugs because she was complaining about the pain. Feeling desperate, she heard a voice telling her to cause a scene if she wanted to get the attention she needed. She was in a Catholic hospital, so she decided to say things that would stir up controversy and get noticed. It worked. She fired that doctor, and eventually, a more competent one took over. After some tests, she was diagnosed with kidney failure, which had gone unnoticed for days because of the initial wrong diagnosis. As her condition got worse, she entered a near-death state. She closed her eyes and suddenly found herself walking through clouds that looked like Earth. There were grass, trees, clouds, and a beautiful sunny day. Under a tree, she saw Jesus waiting for her. It was a surprising moment, and she exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, you really do exist." He greeted her with a warm hug and said there was much work ahead. He introduced her to other spiritual guides like Archangel Michael, El Moria, Mother Mary, and Street Germain. They all went into a golden capsule where she had a detailed review of her life. It was a complex experience where she could feel not only her own emotions, but also the emotions of everyone involved in every moment of her life. After the review, she heard the phrase, "This too shall pass," which had a deep impact on her. Later on, she had several encounters with different spiritual beings who emphasized the importance of love as the core of creation and existence. She was given the task of writing a book, which she eventually published. Over the years, she continued to receive visits and messages from heaven, all reinforcing the message of spreading love and understanding. Some of these encounters involved conversations with historical figures like Marvin Gaye, Freddie Mercury, and Billie Holiday, who shared their struggles and experiences during their time on Earth. Each message carried a profound message of love and the importance of sharing love with others. One notable encounter involved Prophet Muhammad, who emphasized his continuous prayers for the Middle East and his boundless love for all of humanity. As she returned to her physical body, the impact of this experience was profound, instilling in her a deep sense of responsibility to share these messages of love and understanding with the world. Since then, she has continued to receive visits and messages from various spiritual beings, all echoing the message that love is the driving force of the universe. In heaven, she had a moment where she met Jesus. He was incredibly kind and had a striking appearance with long, wavy hair. She felt his unconditional love and couldn't help but cry. He reassured her, saying he was there to love her, not to judge her. He placed his hand on her chest, and a beam of light came out, touching her soul. Afterward, she was taken out of the capsule to meet other guides, and they all walked toward a temple. She had no idea what was happening, but was surprised to learn that there were people waiting to meet her. Cherubs with golden trumpets announced her arrival. She was overwhelmed by these experiences, especially considering her previous atheistic beliefs. So Jesus opened the door, and then she saw the other 3 or 4 guides go in. She followed them, and Jesus came in behind her. She noticed her other guides sitting down at a golden table, and there were 2 chairs left. Jesus came to her left and pulled out a chair for her. She sat down, and Jesus sat to her left, with Archangel Michael to her right and Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Raphael, and many more archangels around the table. To Jesus' left was someone she didn't recognize, who turned out to be God. She sat there, listening to God talk, feeling amazed by the love and welcoming atmosphere. But she was also wondering who this person was. Suddenly, God said, "And Megan will be going back to Earth," just in her head. She didn't say it out loud. God stopped talking and looked at her, saying, "Oh, heck is right, Megan." He mentioned that he heard her thoughts. She flashed back to her days in the Roman Catholic Church and said, "Oh my gosh," realizing it was God. She tried to apologize and ask for forgiveness in various ways. God smiled and said he had already forgiven her. She relaxed and said, "Okay, good," and God told her they wanted her to be herself. She felt comfortable with God at that moment and even made a joke. Everyone laughed. Messages were given to her during this time. She had to walk around the table 77 times because there were 77 of them, but she didn't remember all the messages. One that stuck with her was from White Eagle, who told her to think about whether she was doing or being when she found a white feather. There were other messages too. At one point, she had the chance to go through a giant wooden door to stay in heaven and not go back to earth. She asked if that meant she wouldn't have to go back, and they all said yes. But she made a joke about her Catholic guilt and decided to go back as they instructed. She kept it light but took their advice seriously. She stayed inside the temple and talked to God, Goddess, and other souls. Then they took her into heaven, and she got to meet different people, some who looked like humans and others from other planets. She described heaven as being a bit like the bar scene in Star Wars. Later, she was taken back to a tent she had been staying in, which was purple inside and had a long table. All the archangels from the temple joined her, along with everyone else she had mentioned earlier. Cherubs flew in, lighting up the room, and Prophet Muhammad entered. They all bowed, and he asked her to tell everyone that he's constantly praying for the Middle East and everyone else, including her. He prays for everyone. She listened to his messages. Then she respectfully asked him, "Why do you want me to share this message? I don't understand. I'm not familiar with your teachings." She grew up Catholic in California. What is she supposed to do? He replied, "I have my ways. Just tell everybody I love them." She thought, "Okay, I can do that." After he left the tent, all the angels followed him, and they sat around quietly. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then somebody started talking, but she can't remember who started first. Suddenly Marvin Gaye, or maybe it was Rick James, spoke up and said, "Megan, I wish you would go back and talk about the civil rights movement and being black in that period of time, how difficult it was for me and others, how we were spat on and treated unfairly." It felt like it was becoming a political conversation, and she's not into politics. So she was sitting there thinking, why are they telling me this? Each one of these souls shared their struggles and traumas as a human on Earth. Marvin Gaye, Rick James, Ella Fitzgerald, Cole Porter, and every single one of them talked about the civil rights movement and what it was like to be black, how they were unfairly treated. The stories were heartbreaking. Then she remembered Freddie Mercury speaking up. He said, "It wasn't easy for me to transition during the height of my career from being heterosexual to homosexual," and he shared how he felt and a message for his then partner who was with him when he passed. Billy B., whom she'd met a couple of times, once as a kid and then again as an adult years before this near-death experience, spoke next. He said, "It was very difficult being from the 1920s. I'd walk around with my parents and people would look at me, laugh, and say, 'Look at the funny little man,' and things like this." She was crying when she heard their stories. Each of them wanted their message to be heard. She felt a tremendous responsibility to speak for them. They said, "Megan, you have nothing to worry about. There's nothing to fear." They didn't want to reincarnate to deliver this message. They wanted her to go back and tell everyone that love is the key, that it generates the energy for creation. So that's what she's supposed to do. While she was in the temple, God ordered her to write a book. She only published it last year because she kept receiving visits from heaven since 2007. These visits just happen, she doesn't plan them. The last visit she had was, "You have until November." So, her book was published on 11/12/22. She didn't plan it. It just happened. These were beautiful souls with beautiful messages. There was a concert, a going-away party for her. God organized these events for her. She didn't even believe in God. She questioned him in the Roman Catholic Church. Then, one day after her near-death experience, she was watching National Geographic, and they showed the picture of God as the face of Jesus in the Shroud of Turin. She thought, that's not Jesus, that's God. His eyes weren't open because he was showing disappointment in Jesus being crucified. Jesus and Prophet Muhammad held the highest frequency of love on earth, equal in rank but from different periods. There were many other events that unfolded. She distinctly recalls standing in a circle surrounded by ascended masters, saints, and archangels. Cherubs fluttered around, and tears welled up in her eyes because she was reluctant to return to earth. They all emphasized that she had to go back as there was more work awaiting her. She pleaded, "I don't want to go back, I just want to stay here." They responded, "No, you can't stay. You have to go back or you'll have to reincarnate." She couldn't fathom reincarnation. It was too much for her to bear, and she continued to cry. Each of them, one by one, raised their right hands at different moments, sharing brief yet profoundly loving messages. Although she can't recall the specific content of these messages, they were filled with warmth and affection. They projected a white flame from their hands onto her soul, which comforted her, gradually easing her tears. She then remembered being guided by Jesus and Street Germain. She cannot ascertain the distance they traversed, but they eventually found themselves beneath an olive tree. Street Germain settled in the shade, while Jesus and she engaged in conversation. Jesus looked at her and conveyed, "You must return now." She implored, "Jesus, I don't want to go back. The thought of returning to earth is unbearable." She's never experienced such love before, she just wants to stay here. Jesus responded with an understanding smile, employing what she would call Jesus Psychology 101. He projected an image into her mind, a snapshot of her husband at that time and their 4-year-old son. In unison, both her husband and son telepathically conveyed, "Don't go, we need you." Overwhelmed with emotion, she turned to Jesus and said, "Oh my gosh, my son needs me. She has to go back." Jesus nodded, saying, "All right, you must return." They exchanged a heartfelt hug, and she began her journey back. As she walked along a dirt road, she knew she had to reach a wooden shack. There, she removed her robe and stole, placing them in a wicker basket. She wasn't sure if this was their way of handling laundry or something else entirely. With this task complete, she continued her walk back into her physical body. To her left, she beheld a field of flowers, tall grass, and trees in the distance. Prophet Muhammad and all the angels once again approached her. She approached him, their paths converging, and they met. Although she can't recall his precise words, she looked into his eyes and said, "I have to go back." He replied, "I know." Expressing her reluctance, she told him she doesn't want to go back. With reassurance, he said, "Megan, you're going to be fine. My hand is always at your back. I will always be there, offering love and protection." She reluctantly continued her journey. As she walked further, she eventually passed through the clouds and found herself back in her physical body. She opened her eyes to the presence of a nurse. Overwhelmed by the experience, she exclaimed, She just saw Jesus, as that was the immediate memory that surfaced. Since that transformative encounter, she's received numerous visits from Jesus, Archangel Michael, God, and the Goddess, sometimes individually and at times all together. On one occasion, she found herself among the clouds with everyone from the Golden Table and Temple, the celestial table in the clouds where God, cherubs, and archangels were present. It was truly remarkable, with each visit carrying profound messages.